to recognize my wife, Carol. With one granddaughter with us today, Linda, one of our 18. I want to thank all the veterans for coming. This is a real honor for you to come and share this time with us. Thank you very much. Also, I want to thank Justin for the introduction. You know, I met Justin a couple years ago. He was a state rep, and somebody came and told me that, you know, he votes a lot like you do. Sometimes he'll vote all by himself. A man of principle. I'm delighted he's in Congress, let me tell you. That's what has to happen. A revolution is going on, there's no doubt in my mind. It's an intellectual revolution. It's not brand new, but it's a refinement of our original revolution. And we're going to build on that. We're going to build on the cause of freedom. But when this revolution, you know, is totally successful, it will permeate all of society. Just as the liberalism permeated both the Democratic and Republican society, and we all became Keynesians, this movement is going to go to the point where we're going to have a time when we can say we're all Austrian free market economy. Right now, our vehicle is a particular election going on, and it's in the Republican primary, and a very powerful message can be sent by winning this election. Now, you know, if you look at the evening news, you'll say, well, too bad, he doesn't show up here, they don't even list his name and these things. But right now, we are second in numbers of delegates actually some states, they're still trying to figure out how to count the popular vote. But our organization is doing the job that is necessary and working through the process, which I hope can happen here in Michigan as well. But I'm excited about what's happening because the country has certainly changed. In the last 5 years, I believe it has changed for the better. The number of people now waking up, both young and old, and saying enough is enough, it really shows that the country is way ahead of Washington. Washington is still sound asleep. Now, let me tell you, they don't know you exist out there. That's our job, and that's why a good showing and winning an election and doing well in these primaries is so important. We need to wake up Washington, D.C., for they're sound asleep, and they need to hear our message loud and clear. First got started in politics back in the 1970s because some of the predictions made by those Austrian free market economists came about in 1971 when it was predicted that the pseudo gold standard established in 1945 at Bretton Woods would not work because it still allowed our government to spend too much and print too much money, and they could not honor the commitment of the gold standard of $35 an ounce. So in a way, on August 15, 1979, it was the initial stage of the declaration of insolvency or bankruptcy of this country. Now, we've lingered for a long time, and we have perpetuated and propagated the system we have, but all that has done is perpetuate debt. Now, because the debt has been allowed to build up, it's not just domestic debt, it's worldwide debt, is we now are in the biggest debt crisis in the history of the world. And it's been perpetuated by the dollar standard, this ability for us to issue the reserve standard of the world and live off that. But economic law is more powerful than governments, and this system will change because they can't stop it. So, but although this was known for many years it was coming, and the 1971 announcement was well known, and the bubbles that have been formed over these last 40 years, that has all been known. But we seem to struggle and get out of the recessions and depressions that we've had. But it's always been with more spending, more debt, more inflation, until we got to the point where the debt was uncontrollable and unsustainable. Today, there's a semblance of prosperity in this country, though the unemployment rate is much higher than the government will admit. There's a semblance of prosperity, but it's all based on debt. And this is why the debt crisis is at our doorstep. If you look at the debt per GDP, our debt is bigger GDP-wise than the Greek debt. That's how serious it is. We literally own our national debt is $16 trillion. We owe foreigners $3 trillion. And what are we doing? We're adding at least $1.5 trillion every year to the debt. And what do they do in the Congress? What do? They twiddle their thumbs. They say, oh yeah, we're worried about it. But you know what they don't do? They never cut anything. They only raise more. You have to cut the spending, and that's the reason I say the first year we should cut the spending by $1 trillion.
Starting with the TSA.
People worry about cutting $1 trillion and it might hurt the economy. But it isn't so much spending the money. Who gets to spend the money? If there's $1 trillion floating around being spent, wouldn't it be much better if you got to spend your own money and not the government and the bureaucrats?
Yeah! Definitely.
A lot of people come up to me and they worry about and ask me about on TV constantly. They say, you know, and the Keynesian notion is if you get into trouble from spending too much, the answer is spend more. And so they say, wouldn't this be a terrible time? And even Bernanke, can you remember that guy's name?
Yeah!
He has been challenging me, not by name of course, but he said these people, whoever they are, maybe somebody in here, these people who have to cut spending in the midst of a recession, this is very, very dangerous. You can't do that. But the question is only who quits the spending. If we get to quit to spend the money instead of the government, that makes all the difference in the world. But the only way this can come about is we have to address a very important subject, and that is what the founders asked themselves, and they had a revolution, wrote a constitution. What should the role of government be? That's really the question.
Very limited.
Should we have endless spending and entitlement system and endless wars? Or should the federal government, directly under our Constitution, be meant to do one very important thing, and that is to protect your individual liberty, your right to your life? We've drifted a long way from that, and in the last 100 years, I would say we've really slipped dramatically away, and we're at a crisis point now. But something really important has happened approximately 5 years ago when the financial crisis hit. Most Americans woke up to this. Congress, like I say, they're not awake yet, but the American people woke up and they know there's something very serious going on. And also, during this period of time, the American people, by a large majority, have now come around to the point of saying these wars that we're fighting in the Middle East and around the world make no sense whatsoever. The policy of the Constitution, the advice of the founders say that we should not get involved in entangling alliances nor on the internal affairs of other nations. And yet, that is all that we have been doing, getting more and more involved. But if that is not our role, what should the foreign policy be? It should be a friendship and trade with people. Sure, there's some bad people out there, but when we're a perfect nation and set a perfect example for the world, then maybe we can do some talking. But quite frankly, if we have a perfect nation here, or a much better nation that is prosperous and free and safe and sound money, maybe, just maybe, the other countries would want to follow us, and we wouldn't have to try to force other people to live like we do. About 100 years ago, especially in the time of Woodrow Wilson, we came up with some very bad ideas. And we've been suffering ever since. So the stage was being set for ushering in the age of big government, the undermining of the currency, the change in foreign policy. It was Woodrow Wilson said, "It is our moral obligation to make the world safe for democracy." And look how many people have died. I mean, you have this World War I and II in Korea and Vietnam and the Middle East and constant. Nobody can even absolutely know exactly how many countries that we have troops in. It's at least 135, 140. We have 900 bases around the world, and we're still building them. So this whole idea that we have to do this is such a dangerous economic idea, because, you know, in the last 10 years, these wars have caused us to accumulate $4 trillion additional debt because of these wars. And quite frankly, I do not feel safer because of it. I feel more in danger because of it.
Yeah!
Most dangerous ideas that came out of the Depression was that, well, first off, the Depression was blamed by so many of the left. They said, well, it came because we had too much free markets and the gold standard, and that's what caused the Depression. And then they claim, and they're still teaching this in the schools, and they're still saying, well, we finally got out of the Depression when a war came. And there's some who actually believe that if you have war, you can get out of a depression.